Good evening. My name is Violet Vance, and I am a journalism student here at Penn West Edinburgh. I recently co-authored an article together with two Allegheny students, Heather Amancio and Erin Magnus, who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. But I wanted to take a moment to say that I really appreciated the opportunity to work with them to write the article about the spring show in Gaëtane Verna for the Erie Reader. And I am really happy to be here tonight to introduce Gaëtane as our guest speaker. Ms. Verna is the executive director of the Wexner Center at Ohio State University and has traveled from Columbus, Ohio, in order to speak for us tonight. She juried this year's Nicole and Harry Martin Spring Show, which is currently installed at the Erie Museum, the Erie Art Museum. If you haven't had the chance to check it out yet, I suggest you do. It features the work of local and regional artists, and I had the opportunity to go yesterday, and there is some very interesting work. This past January, Gaëtane was invited to curate the Canadian Pavilion at the 2024 Venice Biennale. The Biennale is a prestigious international art event that has been ongoing for more than 50 years. In 2017, Ms. Verna was appointed Chevalier de l'Ordre des Arts et des Lettres, or the Order of Arts and Letters, by the French government for her contributions to art in France and throughout the world. Tonight, she will speak about the importance of curating and share some of her career experiences. Please join me in welcoming Gaëtane Verna to present Curating Essential Work, the Essence of Work.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. It's a real honor for me to be present with you today. First and foremost, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Laura Dominique, Executive Director at the Erie Art Museum, and also to the faculty at Penn West Edinburgh University Art Department. And a special thanks also to Lisa Austin of Bruce Gallery for the invitation to join your community celebration of the Erie Arts Museum 100th Annual Spring Show by serving as the juror and as the University 2023 Visiting Artist and Speaker Endowment presenter. I have truly enjoyed my time here. In the last few days, I met so many members of the community, and I was welcomed with such warmth, and it was really nice to share the passion and the dedication that you all have for art and artists in society, and also your steadfast support of current and future artists. The title of my keynote address is Curating Essential Work, the Essence of Work. To summarize the theme and topic I wish to discuss with you today, my talk will be both simple and personal. I will discuss my training, the 4 institutions in which I have worked, and finally, I will share projects that have marked my professional career to date. So I'd like to start with this quote. This is a quote from Martinique-born author Frantz Fanon, excuse me. It summarizes the key points that animate my work as an art historian, curator, and art administrator. Though this quote comes from his seminal book, Black Skin, White Mask, published in Paris, 1952, in this quote, Fanon evokes the passage of time and the fact that he is a man of his time and that his writing could, over time, no longer be relevant. For my part, this quote inspires me by allowing me not to forget the complexity of the work that a curator must carry out. Being able to address one's view of the present, the past, and sometimes without knowing it, our views are more about the future to come. This humility in the work and one's posture is for myself an essential position to take and continuously nurture. So my journey began in a public high school in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. The school was named de Roberval. Let me see if this pointer works. So this was my first high school. Then I went to CEGEP, which is like after you finish your high school, you do 2 years before you go to university. Then I went to Concordia. There I did a degree in administration, and then Concordia University, I did a degree in management and international business. And then I was interested in working in the auction art world, and I then went to Paris and studied there for a few years. One thing I wanted to say first about my high school, because it was really important in my life, is that it was the first French high school of the Protestant school board. At that time in Quebec, you either went to Catholic school or Protestant school. So all the Catholics went to the Catholic school, but then all the others, all people with no religion or Jewish, the rest of the world that was not Catholic, all ended up in the Protestant school board. And in the case of my school, it was the first French school board, the first French school in the Protestant school board. And so what was really incredible because of this, our school, we had teachers from all over the world, from France, from Haiti, from Poland, from Morocco, from Czechoslovakia, from Lebanon, and also, of course, Francophones and Anglophone teachers. And so in this school, no one was ever asked where you came from. No one was ever asked what your parents did. And it was truly the best. And I mentioned this because for people who have gone through the trauma of schools and of teachers not enabling you to envision yourself wherever you want to see yourself, for me, I realized that I never suffered those types of trauma, and it has certainly shaped my vision of the world. The teachers were very strict, but they cared. And one thing my father always said about that school was that the teachers and the principal, their kids went to the school, which meant that these people were really engaged in the type of school and the type of teaching and the community that they were building around the school. So there were no limitations in our aspiration, and they pushed us to excel. I then went on to obtain a college degree in administration at Cégep Saint-Laurent, that's what I told you, and then a bachelor degree in management and international affairs at Concordia University in Montreal. At the end of this time, I decided that I wanted to work in the arts market, and more precisely in the field of art auction houses. And then at that moment, I chose to go to Paris. Originally, I wanted to go to London, but it was way more expensive. And because of Quebec and France have disaccord, as a Quebec student, I paid the same price as a French student, which was nothing. So that was the choice that was made to go study there. And then while there, I completed a 2 years degree and in arts administration, and then decided that I really did not want to work in the auction world. But it was a really great training for me because I really understood a lot about the value of acquisition, the values of the price of artworks, and the whole ecology of that part of the art world, which is as important as art history, but understanding the whole, from the production of an artwork to its sale, to its collection, collecting practices. I think that this experience, this 2 years experience, really gave me a lot prepared me for the work that I was going to do further on. Then I decided to go do another bachelor, but this time in art history. And I studied at the Sorbonne at the Institute of Art and Archaeology. And then did a master's degree on African-American artists in Paris between 1945 and 69. And the dates of 45, 69 is that after the Second World War, has a lot, the world, Paris used to be the center of the art world, but after the Second World War, the art world shifts to New York. And so thus the question, why would African-American artists choose to leave New York at this point to be in Paris? Well, the same reason that jazz musicians did this trek, first of all, was because of the racism that artists were under, which artists were living in the US. And second of all, as a lot of them had been in the army, there was a GI Bill, which gave them, provided them with money and ability to go to school. So this was a great opportunity for so many of these artists. So it was a really interesting subject for my master's degree dissertation. And then I decided to do a first year PhD. And at that point, I studied the installations of the artist David Hammonds. So to finish with my training, I was then accepted as a foreign student in the school called École Nationale du Patrimoine. So the translation, literal translation, is the National School of Heritage. So and it's a state-run school in France, where anyone who's going to be a curator of a national collection or municipal collection, you have to do these written exams, and then you get accepted. You spend 18 months. During those 18 months, you take further training, you do internships in your field and also internships in other fields that are different from yours. So I was accepted in the museum program, and then I did internships in different institutions. And I was, luckily enough for me, I was able to do my 6 months internship at the National Museum of Art, which is at the Centre Georges Pompidou. So a big, big machine. And then my other internship in a department that was different from mine, I chose to go to the Education and Cultural Department of the Louvre. Yet another huge, huge machine. So after these years in Paris, and I'm just giving you that context because you will see that that thread comes through the things that I'm interested in and how I shape exhibitions and programs throughout my career. So after these years in Paris, I returned to Montreal. So around 1996. And I did odd jobs while looking for my first job. I tried to find internships in art institution without any success. I did telemarketing, fundraising for a campaign for the Black Medical Association, which this is why I'm a really good fundraiser, because I've asked for money prior to this job. And it's really important in our field. And then I even worked as, I was running the post office of the mailing room of a big accounting firm. And then they kept wanting to offer me a full-time job, and I kept saying no. And they were always wondering, how come you can remember the names of all of the managers so easily? I'm like, okay, yeah, well, art history, I remember names. So, I resisted to this full-time job, which would have paid me really well, but was really not what I wanted to do. And then finally, in May 1998, I was one of the 11 candidates for the position of coordinator of Bishop's University Art Gallery. And at that time, the operation of the gallery were partly devoted to an artist-run center, as well as a university art gallery. So to form an art gallery, and for me, the context of, and you'll see, I'll come back to the context every time. So Lennoxville is a small town in the Eastern Townships. The Eastern Townships is 2 hours east of Montreal. And Lennoxville is Anglophone in a sea of Francophones. And the population, 8,200, and it's mostly the university that is the population. And the university, the art gallery at that time was just Bishop's University Art Gallery. So I would say the three highlights in this position was that there was no other employee but myself. Our annual budget was $5,000 Canadian, which means about 3,700 American. It was a part-time position, and my salary was 23,000 Canadian, and which is about $17,000 US. And I remember vividly my sister-in-law, who's is a stockbroker, was like, you go to work for this much? And I think yes. And my big dream in life was to make 40,000 by the time I was 40. That was the dream. So, but you know, regardless of this, what was I to do in this context? So one rolls up one's sleeves, and more than anything, I was so happy to have a platform where I could develop my ideas. writing grants, convincing the university administration of the need for a full-fledged gallery, because the university had a very extensive music department and also an art history, a small art history, and a small a BFA program. So I was trying to convince them that we should have a full-fledged gallery within the university. And Bishop's University is a liberal arts college where sports and business administration and my say partying were more important than an art gallery. Regardless, despite everything, by working extremely hard and continuously pushing, organizing exchanges with other institutions, inviting artists of all generations. And here I share with you some of the artists we presented, despite our meager means. We produced catalogs and invited local artists from other regions of Quebec, from Ontario and the rest of Canada, as well as Canadian artists living abroad, and even some American artists. So the first show I did in 1998, basically, it so happened that one of my neighbors, my parents' neighbor, she told me about this collector who had an extensive collection of prints. And so I knocked at his door and he was so nice. And he allowed me to borrow these impressive prints, which we presented at the gallery. And then over the years, you know, there's a real mix of mostly contemporary artists, but sometimes we would do historical exhibitions and artists from different generation. And also in Canada, just like everywhere else, there's a lot of touring exhibitions. So I was able to get a very prestigious touring exhibition from the Montreal Museum of Contemporary Art. And that's why in 2003, we could show the works of Bernd and Ella Becker, Christian Boltanski, Arnaud Mag, you know, and all these other artists. So it was a really can-do attitude at that time. Again, despite the size of the gallery, we did miracles. You know, I found volunteers. I developed, thanks to the university, paid internships for students. I wrote grants. I still remember the joy of my first grant, which was $1,242, and which is $922 American, from the Canada Council for the Arts. And for me, why this was so meaningful is that I felt that my work was seen, because the juries for these grants are peer juries. So it's people from across Canada that might have never been in the art gallery, but that would have recognized the quality of my little project. And you know, I've served on many juries following that. And I'm always telling people, ask more money. And they used to laugh at me. They're like, why did you ask $1,242? I said, well, it's because that's what I really, really needed. And so as a juror, I always take pride. I'm always very attentive of when people ask for money, because they really need that money. They need the money, but they also need the peer recognition that their work is of value. And if the community in which they are doesn't necessarily understand what they're doing, but the fact that another body gives you a grant, it also validates the quality of the work. So I never forgot that, even though, you know, in my career, I've gotten much bigger grants. I never forgot the amount of that first grant. So being in this institution, I found a designer who developed invitations for us. I learned to apply the vinyl on the walls of the gallery. I also learned how to take it down. I repainted the walls, filled the holes between exhibitions, welcome visitors, school groups, universities. At that time, we did send faxes. So I sent faxes, wrote press releases, did interviews, really did it all, and learned an awful lot about the work and myself at the same time. And for me, this was a great way, because now anything I ask anyone who works for me or with me to do, I have done that job more than one time. So I'm not a director who's clueless about the labor of every activity within the institution, because I've actually have done it all, you know, from shipping to changing light bulbs, managing the budget. So that experience really trained me well for the future. So at the time, there were no publications, but for me, and that's really a lot of my training from living in France and in Europe. In Europe, every artist, even artists that don't have huge careers, they have at least 1, 2, 3, 4 publications. And so what I started to do, because of course I had no money, is that we started to produce modest publications. And because publishing is essential in the work of a curator, and it's also essential for an artist, for me, the documentation, the writing remained what at the end of an exhibition is left of that exhibition. So I think it's a really important as a testimony to the work of an artist and the work of a gallery and a curator. So at first, what I basically did is that I would do 1 publication a year because I was curating the exhibition. So I would ask different authors to write extensive texts on each of the exhibition. I would write an introduction and we would put them in 1 compendium. So that's why you have the first one, I tried to be really original, 1 World, 5 Universe. The second one was Institute, the Suspended Spaces, Palimpsest, Beyond Words. And what happened over a number of years, and by becoming more and more successful with our grants, and also having the university support the gallery more and more and finding donors, we produced 4 of such compendium books. And then we began to produce monographic publications. And then meanwhile, for each exhibition, we produce a small visitor guide, and decided to call them self-guided tour booklet. And in the self-guided tour booklet, there was an introductory text for each of the exhibition, and also my very small educational program of films and lectures, and also an adapted version of the Proust questionnaire. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the Proust questionnaire. It was, so Proust, the French artist, it was a game where you're asked questions about what's your favorite food. There's a series of questions, and why this questionnaire became famous is because Proust had played it when he was young, and then further on in his life, he played it again and answered the question, and this idea of being able to evaluate the difference between the question. And I decided to adapt this to our self-guided tour booklet as a way for the visitors to get some insight into the artist. So I would ask them, what is their sense of happiness? What is their favorite author? All sorts of questions. And it's something that I felt really interesting, and the artists were really interested in answering these questions. So again, trying to figure out a strategy to bring more insight into the work of the artist. So all these strategies were inspired by my studies, by my internship, and also what was great about this position, it really provided me with the freedom to apply all of these ideas at Bishop's University. So if you have no money, but you have freedom, I still think you're better off. So, so after 6 years at the head of this gallery, and thanks to the help of the principal of the university, we received an endowment of $1 million Canadian, so 750,000 US. Sorry, it's always the downfall. But you have to think, from $5,000 to 750,000. I think we did well. And basically, what was, again, for me, it's really an important factor, is that as I was busy working seamlessly on my own, the principal of the university said that this donor bequeathed $4.3 million to the university, and that she decided to earmark $1 million for the gallery. But in order for this to pass, she had to present it to Senate. And she taught me a very big lesson. She said to me that when she presented it to Senate, and she said, well, those faculties, they all need money all the time. She said, nobody, voted against it. So she said, even though you thought that they were never looking at your work, they saw what you were doing and they all supported it. And so again, there's, I always tell my team, and this is something that I always do, you have to work hard, even if you think that no one is watching, because you don't know who's watching. And clearly these colleagues, that most of them I had not necessarily met, were watching and seeing how we were trying to be transformative of the university and their gallery. So our work allowed the university to understand how the gallery had a role to play within the university and within its local artistic community of the city and the region. The gallery was becoming the bridge between the university and this community. So I would like to talk to you about one of the many projects that we developed during my tenure at Bishop's University. And it was the first solo exhibition of the artist Denise Tomassos. So I will speak to you briefly about the project and the accompanying publication that we produced. So you might ask yourself, who is Denise Tomassos? So she was a Canadian-American artist born in Trinidad, Tobago. She immigrated to Toronto at the age of 8 years old. She studied there and earned a BFA at the University of Toronto in a school that was not world-class, known for their BFAs. And then she went to Yale University to complete her master's degree, after which she taught in Philadelphia and then at Rutgers University in New Jersey. The projects came with a specific context. So around year 2000, as we were crossing the millennium, the Canada Council for the Arts decided to open these grants for millennial projects, and lends at my office a postcard with a painting, an abstract painting, and a Black woman sitting next to the painting. And in 2000, I was pregnant. I left for my maternity leave, because in Canada, we get a year off. Sorry, that's the next revolution. So I came back after 1 year of maternity leave, and the postcard was still on my wall. And I was talking to the person who replaced me, and I said to her, I said, you know, I don't like a lot of painting, but I really like this painter. And she then said to me, she said, well, why don't you reach out to her? And suddenly, you know, something I could have done a long time before, I started researching her, only to find out, you know, everything about her biography, to find out that she had had a Pew Fellowship, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and that, you know, she was a great painter. So I reached out to her, and I approached her at first to do an exhibition of her paintings. She does these magnificent large-scale paintings. But she then told me, she's like, no, actually, you know, I have 2 galleries, which at the time, again, as a Black female painter, to have 2 commercial galleries, one in New York, one in Toronto, was again, you know, something unheard of. And so she told me, you know, I can do this. I can show paintings in a commercial gallery, but one thing I can't do very easily, because it's not commercially viable, is to do site-specific wall paintings. So we developed a project together, and the title of the show was Tracking 30 Years in Canada, 30 Years in Trinidad. And another anecdote is that when we started talking about her career, she had just come back from a group exhibition in Austria, where she was showing with, the show was curated by David Hammons. Now, remember, I did my first year PhD on David Hammons, and in the other artists in the show were Stanley Whitney, and then also the painter Ed Clark. And I knew of Ed Clark because when I did my research on African-American artists in Paris, Ed Clark lived in Paris, was benefited from the GI Bill. So it just felt like so serendipitous that all of this was written in some, you know, somewhere out there. And so we started to work, and so this is 2004. And she starts telling me how right after 9/11, she started to travel around the world, and then was also very much interested in her family. So her family was well off when they were in Trinidad, and there was this house that everybody kept talking about. And so what she did is she asked her, I'll go to the next slide. So she asked her aunties, her uncles, the cousins, her parents. She asked everyone to describe this familial home and decided to recreate it on the walls of the gallery. And so this first image is really the floor plan of the house that she recreated. Then she drew it, with AutoCAD or something in a very architectural, as an architectural plan. And then that same plan, she reproduced it on other parts of the wall where she systematically intervened, with her painting ability. So we did this show, we produced a catalog, which I will show you after, and Denise died in July 2012. And then in July 2020, the chief curator of the McMichael Museum, this is again in Canada, Sarah Milroy, asked me to co-curate an exhibition, a retrospective of Denise's work. So this is the last part of the exhibition where you see the structure, but how her as an artist uses her movement, her colors to create shape and form. And she was such an incredible painter because she just drew the structure, but the painting was just done free flowing, and very much we documented her process, and she really embodied a painting and movement, how she transposed her emotion into the work on the wall directly. So, so this is the catalog that we just produced for the new exhibition. And what came to me was during this intense period of research for the new exhibition, I have the memory that our humble publication before this publication was the only catalog that was ever made of Denise's work. And what really struck me was, and so this is the catalog that we produced, is that we co-produced this catalog with Mount St. Vincent University Art Gallery, because there was a part 1 to the show and a second part. And there was a graphic designer, Annie Lachapelle, from Atelier Kinoto. We had 3 authors, Norbert C. Phillips, who's a very important poet based in Toronto, Ingrid Jenkner, my colleague in Halifax, Franklin Sermon, who is now the CEO of the Perez Art Museum in Miami, and myself. And the book, really documented the exhibition. When you have no money, you realize the cost of just doing a fold out in a book. It costs a lot of money. And the thing that the thing that really dawned on me, Denise died in 2012 of a fluke medical accident, and we did a little memorial at one of her galleries, and the only publication at that time that was ever made, solo publication of her work, was my, our little catalog that we did. And this really reinforced, to me, the importance of the work that we do. However small we think it is, it's really important, because basically that was the only written legacy of this project and of her work. So all of this in order to I wanted to share this example of this project to highlight how we must have the interest we must have in showing work that is of interest to us, in writing, producing catalog, reflecting on the work of artists, because our efforts, however humble they may be, can be the only mark of the passage of an artist and the starting point of research that will bear fruit much later. The link between 2004 and 2021, 17 years later, my interest is still as strong about the work of Denise Tomassos. So now you will understand my joy when I was informed that Denise's work was featured in the 2022 Whitney Biennale in New York. And that same year, in 2022, the Art Gallery of Ontario decided to give her an important major exhibition. And I'm only sorry that she wasn't there with us to be present, but it was really interesting when I heard like all the articles about the Whitney Biennale. Everybody talked about Denise's work, and everybody's like, where, how come we didn't know her? Where was she? And I was thinking, she was always there. You were just not looking. So again, for artists, for curators, you know, follow your dreams, show artists that you're interested in. Don't wait to see that others think that this artist is of value to celebrate them, because they might think of it years after you. So don't be afraid to be a trailblazer and to just chart your own course and to present works that you're really interested in. So I would say, you know, one thing is important is the work that we do with artists and for artists, hence the importance of the work that we're doing day in and day out. Never let yourself think that this work is of no value, as it is important to serve and be of service to art and artists. So next, in 2012, I then moved from my small one-room gallery to this big museum, which is Joliette it's a population of 19,000 people, so smaller than Erie. And the greater Joliette is 42,000 people. And it's a collection, the museum has a collection from the Middle Age to the present day. And really this institution was the result of the will of a religious order based in this community. And at the time, the museum, since then, the museum has become an important touristic anchor for the region and for the other arts institution in the region. So that's the Musée d'Art de Joliette. So here, the project that I really want to speak to you about is this catalog of collections that we produced. And it's interesting because I was at the museum from 2006 to 2012, and middle of those years, I kept getting offers for job, and I kept saying no, because I knew that if I didn't finish this book, no one else would finish this book. Because as one of my translator told me, he said, you know, when you start these books, you know when you start them, but you never know when you finish them. And so really this project was, it's a project that took us 3 to 4 years, and it's both the sum of our research and also the cornerstone on which the institution rests now. So this document follows one of the first catalogs of the collection, which was produced in 1976 by the founder of the museum, Father Corbeil. And before diving into the book, it's important to talk about some of the important moments that brought us to produce this book. So maybe 2 years after I arrived at the museum, we received a $500,000 subsidy from the provincial government to redo our permanent collection. And then it was supposed to be to produce a guide. And the officer from the ministry is like, just call it a guide. You can make it a catalog, but just don't call it don't call it a catalog, but make, you know, because in the grant, it was a guide. So a gallery guide is not a catalog of collection. So it was nice to see how the person internally was helping us to contextualize our project in order for us to be able to do really what we wanted to do. And at the same time that we embarked in this project of researching and redoing our permanent collection, it dawned on me that the basis of our collection was a loan, a deposit of 99 years from the religious order, the Clercs de Saint-Viateur. And I decided in doing the research that we should have a scientific committee to look at works, which works to choose, which works to restore. And while we were doing this work, I also started to think that what happens in 2067, when the religious orders, you know, the person in charge of the finances, as you know, religious orders are dwindling down and they're selling a lot of their asset, and all these great works of art become assets. And would any one of the members of that order understand the relationship between the initial intent of lending the works to the institution? And if they didn't understand that, they might ask us to purchase those works, which we would never be able to purchase these works. So I decided that we were going to do an entire survey about the provenance of the works and to start working with the religious order to say, these are the bodies of works that we really want to keep, and these are the ones we don't want to keep. And you have to understand that in a religious order, these assets belong to the entire community. So it's not just an idea, it's something that you have to build trust and understanding, and you have to build this trust so that at one point they understand the value of leaving the works at the museum in Joliette instead of keeping the property of the work. So, and I remember when I embarked on this project, one of my colleagues said to me, why are you doing this? You know, by the time you leave, all you will have done is have done this work. And I thought to myself, well, that's the work that needs to be done. So I'd rather do this and leave the institution in a better situation than not care and push the problem further. So it was a really, so what we did in this publication, we decided, so first of all, because in Quebec, we did one book in French and one book in English with the same content. We had an introduction. We started to write the story of the collection. We also wrote this, we were lucky enough that most of the directors of the institution were alive, so we interviewed them all. And it's always interesting when you leave an institution and to have people come back and ask you to talk about that time. And so it was a really great moment. And then we decided to present the works to create these chronology. So this is a part where we were talking about the history of the institution. And then we decided to do this huge chronology that developed, we researched every exhibition, all the artists, all the curator. We told the history of, you know, who was the new director that arrived, who was the new board chair. So we did this massive deep dive. And then we also decided that the works would be presented in chronological order, not by date of the creation of the work, but rather according to the date when the work was entered in the collection of the museum. And as such, religious artworks would rub shoulders with a contemporary painting, with a sculpture, photography, Canadian, European art. We didn't want to divide the works in those very, let's say, empire-like divisions. And so this organization of the collection creates a new narrative which links the history of the collection through its collection policies. And these dates revealed not only the collection data, but the creation of a museum, and tells the story of the successive curatorial decision and the generosity of donors who donated works to nurture and grow the collection. It was a different way of presenting the collection compared to other such collection catalogs that I had researched prior to that. And so for every work of art, we did the whole research of the provenance, and in some cases, we asked colleagues of other museums to come and see the works, and we really did a deep dive. And so each of the works were presented according to their NAC number, which is basically their the number that we use in cataloging the artwork. And that was a novel idea. Here, I just want to share with you some of the exhibitions that we did. So we had a permanent collection of historical religious works. And then I was interested in introducing video art, and chose this work by American artist Bill Viola. And this work titled Observance is totally inspired by religious art, but I also thought that this work was the perfect work to put next to historical collection, because it did speak to the emotion that the artist is trying to convey, but at the same time, the actors are just gazing at something that is offsite that we can't see. And there was so much emotion in this work. And one of the things, sorry, one of the things that I always think that is very important is that you also have to understand the community with whom you're working. And many of the people in Joliette were not necessarily familiar with video art. So I chose this work as a perfect work to introduce them to video art. And at the end of the show, everybody wanted us to purchase it. But of course we couldn't, because this was a bill viola. We just didn't have the money to do it. But it was a really profound work that touched so many of our visitors. And I was so pleased that we were able to present that. This is the work of an artist called Javier Tellez. So after that first Bill Viola, then I started to show much more video works. So Javier Tellez is a Venezuelan artist living and working in New York. And this beautiful video called A Letter on the Blind for those of us who see. Then we worked with Kim Suja, who's an artist from Korea. And at the same time, we always had permanent exhibition, more extensive exhibition of Canadian art, but through video work, it was my way of being able to introduce international artists within our program. This was an extensive exhibition that we did of a Portuguese artist named Vasco Araújo. And then I wanted to talk to you about this major exhibition that we did of the artist Gabor Shalaz. And Gabor is a Canadian artist originally from Hungary, and he moved to Montreal in 1956 in the midst of the Hungarian Revolution. And so this was like a really interesting exhibition. And it was just black and white photography. There were some color photograph, and Gabor is an artist that had worked as a documentary photographer and also had a practice of just, being a photographer. And what I really loved about this project, this was the first time in my career that I was able to work with an exhibition designer. And what was so wonderful about that is that I keep an incredible memory of this experience, because working with the exhibition designer, we were constantly in conversation. And one thing I wanted to share with, so even everything was designed and thought of to create the circulation of the visitor. We thought of, which font to use, the sizes of the letter, the placement of the work. Everything was a conversation between the exhibition designer, the curator, and the artist. And it was just a dream exhibition. And we did so well that we were able to get the National Gallery of Canada to take this exhibition, and then they toured the exhibition to 6 other institutions across the country. And for a small museum in a 19,000, citizen, it was a big coup for us. And we co-published an extensive publication with the National Gallery. So this was, so when I think of the Musée d'Art de Joliette, this is now how I think of this museum, because so the last year that I was there, the Ministry of Culture and Communication, so remember I was telling you about our project to renovate, to redo the permanent collection. But while I was thinking of this, the roof of the museum had been leaking for years and years. And then we all thought, like, are we going to redo a permanent collection while we have a roof that is leaking? And it was really wonderful how, because these big projects are very political, you need to get all levels of government to agree that, this is the money that should be going to this project specifically. And at that time, the government in power, so let's say whoever was the government in power, our local MP was not of the same government, right? So you're like, oh, are they all going to work together, or is this going to be, but they all came together around the museum. And for renovation of all museum in the province of Quebec, the budget was $143 million USD. No, sorry. The whole budget for the entire province was 8.2 million, and they gave us 7.3 million to renovate our institution. And at first, when I learned that, when I learned that news, I phoned the regional officer and I go, "Is this a big deal?" He goes, "Gaëtane, my phone keeps ringing. Everybody's like, how comes you guys got all the money? Why did this project get all the money?" So what was also another great thing, so we were developing the renovation in total was 13 million, so 9,660,000 US. And the Greater Joliette, so 42,000 people, all the mayors came together and they gave us $960,000 to contribute. So even before we went on a capital campaign, we had already raised, 11.3 million out of 13 million budget. And so I did not do, signed the 10 million contract. The Claire de Saint-Viateur decided to give us the artworks, and then I was gone. And so then somebody else came after me. She did the museum, and I'm always happy when I go back to Joliette to see the museum still thriving and to feel that my work, really, was a cornerstone that enabled the museum to continue on. So this was Joliette. Then I moved from, what did I tell you, 42,000, the Greater Joliette, to Toronto, which is the population of the Greater Toronto is 5,600,000 people. So that's a different scale. And Toronto is the financial capital of Canada and the 4th largest city in North America. And other facts that are very different from Joliette, 200 people of 200 ethnic origins live in Toronto, 160 different languages, and 50% of residents were not born in Canada. So the power plant was originally established in 1976 as the Art Gallery of Harbourfront, and the original powerhouse with its annex building, the Ice House, now the Harbourfront Centre Theatre, they were both built in 1926 to house the heating and refrigeration equipment for the massive Toronto Terminal warehouse. And so it was part of a federal government acquisition of 92 acres lakefront site, and the powerhouse operated as a full-fledged powerhouse until 1980. And then in 1980, the Harbourfront Centre Corporation offered the Gallery of Harbourfront the opportunity to renovate the 1920 power station as its new home. And then the architect Peter Smith of Let Smith Architect was chosen to undertake the renovation, the design of which took into consideration both the building's history and the demand of contemporary art. So the gallery opened to the public on May 1st, 1987, and the power plant is today easily recognizable by its chimney and exterior facade, both of which have been restored to reference its history. And so this is a common picture of an either fall or summer opening at the power plant. The mandate is that the Harbourfront Art Gallery, operating as the power plant, is the largest Kunsthalle type exhibition center, which is a non-collecting museum in Canada, dedicated exclusively to contemporary visual art from Canada and around the world. So here I'm just showing you images of the space, and I will share with you some images of the many exhibitions that we produced during my tenure at the power plant. So this was a site-specific installation of Mexican artist Carlos Morales. The mission vision that we worked under while I was leading the institution was that the power plant be a leading international center for contemporary art, renowned for its diverse programming and exceptional commitment to groundbreaking contemporary Canadian and international art. We showed the work by Christian Marclay, The Clock, which was a durational work that lasts 24 hours. And so we did a number of nights where the gallery was open all night and people could come at any time of day and night and see the work of Christian Marclay. We also had a series called Sunday Scene. So Sunday Scene was a way for us to invite members of the community, maybe artists, university professors, doctors, whoever, that would choose one work in the exhibition and speak of that work, and not speak of the work from the position of the institution, but from their own position. So they could be critical of the work, they could be critical of the exhibition, and but this was a way to bring community into the conversation of the exhibition. Because we're called a power plant, everything was power. So we had a program for families and children called Power Kids, where they would do the parents and the children would do a visit of an exhibition, and then after they would do a hands-on activity that dealt with one element of the institution. We also had performances, and the exhibition I wanted to talk to you about is titled The Unfinished Conversation, Encoding Decoding. And so, oops, just like that. This is an exhibition that I co-curated with Mark Seeley, who's director of Autograph, an institution in London. And The Unfinished Conversation examines the physical manifestation and state of mind of specific post-war visual dynamics. The exhibition focuses on the way in which the image and the archive, whether personal or national, have influenced the way authors perceive themselves socially and historically. The exhibition presented the works of Terry Atkins, Jonna Comfra, Sven Augustinian, Steve McQueen, Sheila Keeley, and Zineb Zadira, 6 artists whose practice is primarily devoted to commenting on and relating recent social political events and situation to the not so distant past in order to help us understand the world in which we live in. So we, of course, did a publication, because that's what we do. And the catalog, again, we use this catalog to invite, to reproduce the seminal text by Stuart Hall. We also asked Kabina Mercer to write, Nora Alter, Ranji Housouk, Chantal Pontbriand, and then we worked with a feed design by Patrick Pellerin to do the graphic design. So the grounding of the exhibition is this really incredible work by Jonna Comfra, which is all around that speaks of the work of the cultural theorist Stuart Hall. And Stuart Hall is from Jamaica. And this is a work, a 3-screen video, where basically Comfra speaks of both the personal life of Stuart Hall, as well as his public, intellectual, political life. And this first image is incredible because the beginning of the work is where Stuart Hall says that a defining moment in his life is that he was 3 shades darker than everyone else in his family. And that starts the whole question of othering in one's own family. And so, and then it charts the let's say the lifelong work of Stuart Hall that you find in everything that he's written in terms of cultural theory. And what's amazing is that Jonna Comfra created this incredible work that speaks as much of the life of Stuart Hall, as well as the changes in England, you know, all of this after the Second World War. Then there was this work by Steve McQueen called End Credit, which is basically through access to information, Steve McQueen found all the files of the FBI against Paul Robeson. And basically the work is a durational work of 6 hours where somebody is reading the documents. And each time you see those block marks, they say redacted. And so it's so interesting to actually read how the government was, hounding Paul Robeson, and Steve McQueen, who's the same Steve McQueen who did the film, now I forget the title, 12 Years a Slave. He's British, and when he started doing research, he realized how come he did not know about Paul Robeson, and so that's why he started doing this really incredible work. Then we showed this work by Terry Atkins called Flumen Oration, which is really an interesting work where he has images of early 20th century dirigible together with the speech of Dr. Martin Luther King against the Vietnam War. And in the backdrop, it's the music of Jimi Hendrix. And then the link is as much the fact that Jimi Hendrix was in the aviation and then the link between the materiality of parachutes and this idea how humans use technology to advance war, and why don't they use technology to advance the good on this earth. Then we showed the work of Algerian French artist Inef Zedira about this woman whose husband was one of the early documentary of the War of Independence of Algeria, and how this elderly woman has this archive that she cannot hold, she can't take care of the archive, but the archive, she has a relationship, a physical relationship with the archive because it's the archive of her husband's work, and how she doesn't know how to let go of this archive. So she doesn't want to give it to the French government because they were the bad people, and she doesn't have the means to take care of the archive, but again, she doesn't want to give the archive away. So the work is a really poetic way of talking about the role of documenting the Algerian Revolution, and then what happens to the object at the end. Then the work by Sven Augustingen, another really interesting work. Basically, the man that we see here, this guy, he's a retired Belgian high-ranking civil servant who decided to do his whole PhD research on the death of Patrice Lumumba, who was the elected president of the Congo. And Sven, who's a Belgian filmmaker, follows this man. And basically the whole film is about the denial of responsibility. So throughout the film, this main character, he speaks to, he's talking to the widow of Patrice Lumumba, and arguing that, the Belgians had nothing to do with the death of Lumumba, that it was the other forces who did it. And so he goes on and on and on, and the filmmaker follows him, and you can't believe the things you hear, And for me, this work, which is a very long film, very lyrical, but at the same time, you cannot believe people say the things they say about a moment in history that has been researched. And just recently, the remains, the tooth that was left of Lumumba was buried a few months ago. But all this to say that this work also was a great learning lesson for me. At the time, my daughter was in grade 4, so maybe 8, 9 years old. And I was always complaining that the school was never taking them to come and see exhibitions. So she chooses this exhibition to take her class. Could you have chosen something more simple, And so the class comes, they see the John Comfra, and they say that that's the best film they've ever seen. They love it. And we were worried because there were images of war. There was like a whole, and the kids were like, no, this was good. We love it. The music, the sounds, everything. And they didn't like the Steve McQueen. I think they thought that was kind of boring. And then when they started watching this film, they spent 20 minutes. They came out and they said, this is the most boring film we've ever seen. But they said everyone in this film is lying. And we were like dumbfounded. We're like, oh my God, they got it. Like, immediately. And then after the class left, I contacted the teacher and I asked the teacher, you know, what did you think of the visit? She's like, well, I'm not sure the kids understood everything, but they were certainly very quiet and the parents really appreciated the visit. So then I asked my daughter, I said, you know, is this true? And my daughter said, you know, Mom, most of these kids usually they're very rambunctious and they don't listen. And everybody was listening throughout the exhibition. So it really taught me again how, you know, this idea that children don't understand what you present to them. It's totally false, because I took this long to tell you about this work. They watched it, 20 minutes of an hour and more film, and they summarized it in the best ways. So for me, this was a really a great lesson. And then finally, this work by Sheila Keeley, who's a Canadian photographer who in the 1980s had traveled all through Eastern Africa and had documented a lot of buildings in Zaire in the Congo that no longer exist, because after the successive wars, all these things have been destroyed. So again, the importance of archive, of documenting. So during my 12 years and 7 months, we curated 69 exhibitions of artists from Portugal, Senegal, Mexico, Guatemala, Germany, Canada, United States, Great Britain, Lebanon, France, Belgium, Argentina, Scotland, Hong Kong, Bangladesh, Brazil. We published 42 books, catalogs. We commissioned 38 new works. We produced 16 editions to support and fund the work of the gallery. And we developed public programs that connected with communities such as Power Youth, Power Kids. We organized our travel program for our donors, taking them to Marfa, Texas, Kinget, Nunavut, Istanbul, Lisbon, Porto, Paris, Buenos Aires, Washington, D.C. We provided training to our curatorial fellows, and our curators of education fellows. And so for me, those 10 years were really, really, really important. And again, this was not just me doing it. I had a team around me and we worked hard. We laughed an awful lot, but I think we really marked a moment. And one of the things that in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, a lot of my, I would say, high-end donors, a few of them came to me and said, you know, everything that you had been teaching us through the works of the artists, this is what, you know, this reckoning was about. So for me, it again, you know, was a proof that through the voices of artists, there's real communication, people do understand. And so it gives me even more courage for us to continue to do the work that we do. And so now the last chapter. So since November 28, 2022, so 6 months ago, I'm like the executive director of the Wexner Center for the Arts at The Ohio State University. So this building was inaugurated in 1989 as both a creative laboratory and public venue for contemporary art in all forms. The WEX is a dynamic cultural institution housed in a signature work of the late 20th century architecture. And so the WEX is a multidisciplinary international laboratory for the exploration and advancement of contemporary art. Through our exhibitions, screening, performances, artist residency, and educational program, the WEX acts as a forum where established and emerging artists can test ideas and where diverse audiences can participate in cultural experiences that enhance the understanding of the art of our time. So here I'm going to share some images of some of the people that the WEX has presented and brought in over the years. So in its program, the Wexner balances a commitment to experimentation with commitment to traditions of innovation and affirms the university's mission of education, research, and community service. So this was when Mark Bradford had one of his first major show at the WEX, and he was in conversation with Amina Robinson, who was a very important local artist in Columbus. We have a strong film department, and over the years, they've presented so many illustrious filmmakers. Isabella Rossellini was there. But again, like a few weeks ago, we presented the work of the filmmaker Alanis Obamsawin, who's an Abenakis filmmaker, 90 years old, and she came to, we presented one of her most important films and had a conversation with her. And for me, this was really important. And this is where I think I can also bring to the institution. So my team was just telling me, oh, we're presenting a film of Alanis Obamsawin. And I said to them, she's a queen, she's 90 years old. Have you told the provost that she's coming? Have we reached out to Indigenous communities? And everybody said, well, you know, Indigenous community in our region do not like, you know, land grant institution, basically their land that was taken away from them. And I said to the team, well, maybe this is the opportunity as we're bringing an elder to build bridges with the community. So we did the hard work of contacting local communities, of meeting with them, of telling them about Alanis, and it was such a wonderful evening. And we as an institution also have to get out of a comfort zone in order to reach communities and do this type of work. So here I'm just sharing some so this Andy Warhol show was a really famous exhibition that really marked the consciousness of people. This was a beautiful, what's amazing about the Wexner Center, they have these artist residencies. So they give artists like, I think a budget of $50,000 to do a residency and commission new works. And for me, it's as like the progression from the power plant to the Wex is perfect because at the power plant, it was exhibition only. At the Wex, we have film, video, performing arts, and learning and public practice. So I'm just going to finish our talk with just examples of some of the work that's being done at the Wex. We also do this outside screening, which they call drive-in, and they just project a film outside in the summer, and everybody comes and eats and drinks and be merry and watch the films together. This is just each time they have a filmmaker that comes and work in their studio. We have the studio in kind program where people are given time to work with editors at the Wex, and then also they have free housing, no stipend, but they come and work, and some filmmakers come year after year to finish a project. So the Wex has these long relationship with artists, which I very much love. And this was when they had an opening of Micheline Thomas. So this is my last quote, and it summarizes what for me is the essential worth of a curator or a museum curator. Questions that are elucidated through the work of artists. My goal was to share with you the work done in different institutions that I've had the privilege to lead, the work of artists that have trusted me to present, and the trust that communities have welcomed me over my career and have supported me throughout this journey. Now at the Wex, I will continue with the same work in a different context, but always wishing, as the quote says, to be a person who questions constantly, continuously and constantly. And again, saying that the work that one does in an institution is as much as the work that you do with an artist, the work that you do with your team, and the work that you do with the community. Because if the three don't work together, then it never functions, and you have to trust, and you have to adapt also the work that you do for the community in which you are embedded. And for me, that's really important, that I can be the same person, but if I'm curating at Bishop's, if I'm curating in Joliette, at the power plant, or at the Wex in our center, I'm not going to curate the same projects because these are different contexts. So thank you very much.
I think we'll go ahead and get started with the discussion and the Q&A portion. So Gaëtane, thanks so much for the fascinating deep dive into your trajectory and the institutions that have shaped you and that doubtlessly you have shaped. I wondered, You talked a lot about the work that you've done with and for artists. You also touched on audiences, but I wanted to ask if you could elaborate on your work with audiences and thinking about inclusivity in museum spaces. And I hope Rhonda can weigh in here as well. I know this deeply interests you. And you know, whenever I take students on a field trip to museums, inevitably I get anxiety-ridden questions about, is there a dress code? Which is a fair question, and it's never written down, certainly, and the answer is no, but then also I understand where that pervasive anxiety comes from. Even at the university, or I should say college art gallery that I run, which I think of as a pretty low-key space, there's anxiety about keeping in the doors, because I think that institutions of display are invested with cultural capital, and not everyone feels like that's for them and like they have access to it. And I think these are questions that the art world is really grappling with right now. And so I just wondered, and you touched on this with the, I think the Sunday scene programming and some other things you talked about, but could you talk more about how you're working, whether it's at the WEX or other institutions, to give folks the tools and to empower them to feel like they can come in the doors and participate in the conversations? And Rhonda is someone who's thinking a lot about equity and access. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Okay. This is for me, it can be as basic as I was always telling our front of house staff, you must smile at people. That's like the first thing, because I always said that, we will win the people one by one. And I was always reinforcing exactly what you were saying, that for many people, crossing the threshold of the gallery is already a big thing. And that's where also in a context like, especially in Toronto, having a really culturally diverse team that represents the community in which we are is really important. So that, when a woman walks in wearing a hijab, and in front of her, she has a boss who's half from Iran and half from Iraq, he's not going to have that twitch or that gaze, which I would often tell my team who were Caucasian. I would say, you have no clue that when you kind of do that, the other person sees it. You don't see it, but we see it. So really having a really culturally diverse team, creating an environment where we can ask questions, we can talk about everything, for me was really, really important. And also, like in the diversity of the artists that you show also, communities suddenly feel, they walk a little taller when they go, oh, this is, we had an artist from Kurdistan, and, a lot of people from the Kurdish community, which had never been to the gallery, came. Then for me, the question after is like, once we bring them once, I would like them to come back and not only be interested in seeing works of Kurdish artists, but works of every artist. So I think this is something that we've always, at least I've always tried to build into our program, whichever institution I was in. And I remember when I was at Bishop's, I did a Black History Month, and Bishop was very, very white, very homogeneous Francophone area, except for the university. And then basically at that time, most of the other Black students was mostly the football players or the basketball players. And so I did a Black History Month, and I showed Daughters of the Dust, and my mom was like, okay, but there's no Black people here. And I said, well, I'm doing it for all of us, right? I wanted the white students to also see Daughters of the Dust, right? So that's always how I've tried to do this, to be inclusive by really showing the diversity of practices, but being very, very proactive in the way we welcome people, the way we welcome everyone the same way. We don't know, it's not about how people are dressed, it's not about anything but just welcome, a smile, which is basic, but in art galleries, often people are very like this, and they don't realize that scares people away. The other thing for me that's really important is like the language on the wall text.
Yes. Canada is so much better at that than we do in the US, but
no, but you guys are not that bad either, really, seriously. And interestingly enough, I was getting a lot of criticisms from some of my board members about the language of the text. And so I have these neighbors, Judy and Steve, who are Americans, but are also Canadian, and they're professors emeritus. And one time they took our program guide and started reading it, and my kids were younger and they were rolling their eyes, and they both said, we're with them. Like, what are you people talking about? We have PhDs and we don't understand. And so I decided, I go, okay, fair enough. I said, your new job, and it's still to this day their job, when we write any text we write, after we finish, we send them to Judy and Steve. And since they're professors, they just go at it because they take the position that they are the layperson who's just strolling in and who's coming in. And they keep saying to my team, why are you guys trying to show us that you're smart? That's not the purpose of a wall text. That's, so those details also, how, choosing a word that everybody understands instead of trying to lay your knowledge, like I was having this conversation with one of my staff. She absolutely wanted to reference glissant and opacity. I said, your visitor doesn't care about opacity. I said, if you're going to talk about opacity, you have to explain what glissant is, and you have to decide why. So that's not what you write in 100-word,
right?
So can you find another word or another way to express the same notion without having to lay your knowledge, which, as you know, is only finite. So that's how we've tried to do it, and I'm tackling the same thing at the Wexner. The fight between the marketing team and the curatorial team, and teaching everyone that we need to. It's not about us; it's about the visitor. Of course, it's about respecting the voice of the artist, the voice of the curator, but you also have to think of your audience.
I appreciate the way that you kind of integrate these facets that are both circumstantial, just like how things are happening in the gallery, smiles, friendliness, with the more structural aspects of the institution, who's represented on staff, who's represented in the collection, and then how are we writing about those objects.
Well, I mean, I think art institutions, from my perspective, are supposed to be inclusive. Like, the job is to get people in there. And if you're writing, if the descriptions of the art are using, $10 words, and if people are looking at you funny when you come in, in your jeans and t-shirt, then the whole point of it is to create a barrier, right, that keeps people out. And even the way that people, that organizations describe the art is about either presenting a barrier or tearing one down. And I think that, quote unquote, traditionally, the ways in which art institutions have operated is that we really want to cater to people who can write the big checks. Right. And if you come in jeans and a t-shirt, we kind of think you can't write the big check, right? Rather than thinking about, but if we make this accessible to everybody in the community, right? The person in the jeans and t-shirt might not be able to write the big check, but they'll pay the fee several times a year, right? To come in and see the art that you're doing. They'll buy money, they'll use their money in the gift shop and things like that. So this idea of inclusion makes sense. It always has made sense. But, if you think about art as this, class-based activity, right, that has been for people who had money, then you can see why people fight when you start talking about changing the language of the descriptions, and they might balk at how people are dressed when they come into or if people are loud and amusing. Right. I never understood why it has to be quiet. Like, it's, we can laugh, we can, but I have an anecdote that I also think that sometimes people do things not because they mean badly, but we need to all be. So we were doing an exhibition of an artist, Kader, and because of the way the exhibition was laid out, we would have needed, 3 more gallery attendants. We didn't have the money for 3 more gallery attendants.
and our curator who was German and like a really nice person, like completely nice. She's thinking of how to minimize the number of people. So she says, and remember, she's European, she's not American, she's not Canadian. She says, oh, well, we can have one gallery attendant, and when somebody comes in, you know, then when they move, then the gallery attendant can follow them.
Oh my gosh.
And we said, no, we can't do this. She's like, what? And then I explained to her, which again, from her position as a white German woman, she would never think that if somebody followed her, it was because they were suspicious of her. But then when we told
Put
her,
that painting in your purse.
then we told her that, and it was great. It was a great moment because she never thought her intention was just, how do we solve the problem that we don't have 3 gallery attendants? Maybe we have 1, and then when somebody comes in, we're like, no, you can't do this. And I said to her, me as a Black person, each time I walk into a store and somebody follows me, this is what I think. So it was a good learning moment for her. And what was great is having a team where you can have this discussion where nobody felt triggered, threatened, or whatever. And she's like, oh, I never thought of that. And she was honest in this. But again, you need to have, you know, and even our head of education at the time, who had worked in the US and who's white and gay and Jewish, she's like, no, Carolyn, you can't do this. We don't do this. This doesn't work, right? And so because our team was really open and everybody talked about this, and she often told me about this story that for her, this was a revelation, because she, in her own self, would never think of that if somebody followed her in an exhibition. She would just go, oh, the person is doing their job and they're making sure that, you know, I'm not touching, but she doesn't see an ill fate. So again, it's this understanding that we all come to institution from different perspective. And so to always be mindful of how others may feel that is different from you know?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can I ask a little bit about your commitment to the archive? It came up a number of times in the talk, and I got very excited about this as an art historian. I love books. I'm a bibliophile. You love the book loft, so I mean, clearly we're on the same team here. But you know, we're in a world where things are increasingly digital, where people are not reading as much. We live in the age of the tweet, and you're talking about like nice publications, and they're expensive, and they're physical, and they're tangible. And you're talking also about like the very unsexy work of curating, right? You know, the exhibition guide / catalog, or the catalog of the collection. And you emphasized a number of times the importance of doing that work for artists, for the institution. And so I'm curious just for you to kind of elaborate that, maybe to hear your thoughts on academic publishing and where we are with that. And especially thinking about accessibility. And, you know, we just talked about language and how we can't write these things for the scholars. We need to write them in enriching but accessible terms. How do you balance all of this and still retain that commitment to the archive and building the archive?
I think that I feel that, you know, with the digital world in which we live, you can have different places for these types of work. So you have the wall text, that's one place for knowledge. Then you have, let's say, what you're going to write on a website. You can use a video to have the artist speak of their work. And then you can also have the catalog, which might be a more scientific, more deep dive. So having a balance of the different types of publication, and so that your visitor who first is interested because of just seeing the object, the artwork, and reading what's on the wall. If they want to go deeper, you have the self-guided tour booklet. They can go on the website, find research articles, and then, you know, if they're really passionate about it, they can decide. So I think having different levels of writing for different purposes, and then also creating, you know, artist talks, conversation, panel discussion. So many ways of talking about the same thing, but from different angles. And that's why I also love the idea of learning in public practice, because you can have a film. You know, there's so many ways to bring people in. And so you're not excluding anyone, but you're creating different ways of entering the work the artist from a different perspective. But also, you know, when people are evaluating the value of an artist, how many publications were written is really an important thing. So this is something that we, you know, in terms of the work of curators, and curators also want to do this type of research. I think it's really important to not to only have one thing, but to have a diversity of support material. Absolutely.
Listen, I think that when people try to keep knowledge from people, it's always a power-based reason for it. I have no real I mean, I do. I understand structurally why people do it, but why would you keep information from people, right?
Yeah.
So if you're writing in a language that is not accessible to most people, it's not just that you are writing to a specific audience, you are writing to exclude other people and keep those people from that knowledge. And whenever I think about people, structures, institutions, governments, societies, whatever it is, that try to keep knowledge from people, my response is to go straight for it, right? Why do you not want me to know that? And so part of the reason that I think it's important to not just archive, but to widely disseminate information in a variety of ways in a variety of levels, so that anybody who wants the information can get access to it. And I think that this even goes for what we do, right? We're in classrooms. Well, you know, the ways in which people access information are very different now than what they used to be. I mean, right? We're all ready. And then you have a smaller one, right? You know, in your purse. And so, yeah, I don't understand when people make the argument that we shouldn't have a book and a film and a podcast and and an article that you can read on your phone when you're on the subway. I don't understand people who are saying we shouldn't make it widely accessible. It's knowledge. Of course you should make it widely accessible. I mean, that's the position from which I come. And so I think the same thing applies when you're talking about art and art institutions. Let people know, what are you afraid of?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've moved away in teaching from the kind of peer-reviewed source requirement and just sort of made it more expansive to engage with podcasts and all kinds of sources, because you're right, it's knowledge. It's
But I always think that the best authors, they write in a very simple language. I mean, the real good authors, you're like, wow, I get this, you know.
I'm constantly looking for that kind of unadorned language,
Exactly.
straightforward.
Yes.
Point. Absolutely. I just have one more question, and then I thought we could kind of open it up, or if you have more, but I wanted to, and this is because there are a lot of students in the audience, and Gaëtane, I was struck, especially at the beginning of your talk, when you were kind of recounting the ways in which you said yes to a lot of opportunities, and you said yes to things that were maybe from some perspectives under remunerated.
That's a nice way to say it.
Right. Yeah. So I really appreciated your transparency about numbers, especially in our world. We tend to be, we obfuscate, we don't talk about these things, but you said exactly what was the budget, how much were you getting paid, what did your stockbroker sister and that's really helpful information. But you said yes to that, and then you made so much of that opportunity. But you also talked about saying no. You talked about saying no to the mailroom manager job, but also you talked about at one point not taking job offers in the art world because you wanted to finish that project. And I wondered, and you've done the academic hustle. So, how, in terms of thinking about where students are, because unpaid internships are not ethical, right? They're just perpetuating a system of inequity and privilege.
I think those are dead now, no? At least in Canada,
but I think we're getting
nobody does them.
We're getting away from them, but I still see, especially for artists, I think there's a lot of requests for artists, like just do this for the profession, do it for the love, and so how do you advise emerging scholars, emerging artists, students to kind of negotiate that terrain, saying yes to things that don't seem like they're going to really pay the bills, but maybe this is a really good opportunity and you can make something truly great of it, versus saying no to protect yourself from being taken advantage of?
Well, I mean, I always, and I must be clear, I came from a privileged place. Like at the time that I was making no money, my husband, he was, you know, he had a PhD and he was doing a postdoc, and I wanted to be independent. I go, we have to split everything 50-50. He goes, well, I'll be eating caviar and you'll be eating peanut butter. Something like, he's like, forget it, you can't afford, you know. So that was, you know, that condition. And also the city where we lived, the cost of living was very, you know, was low, right? In that sense, I was able to do this, you know, and this has been a real problem and challenge in arts institution. So on the one hand, we want to be diverse and we, you know, but I mean, who has the means to be in an unpaid internship or not be paid a lot of money when you come out of school and you have debts? You need a job to pay off your debts, right? So when I started, you know, as soon as I started at the university, I created these internships, you know, and then even at the Paraplan, I created these fellowships, which at first we paid people $15 an hour, and by the end, you know, we're paying them $20 an hour, you know, 40,000 a year, 45,000 a year. And I was kept pushing the envelope so that the money we raised was really to pay the person, because I would say to some of my donors, if you want diverse people working in this field, they need to be paid because they do not have the luxury, especially in a city like Toronto that's really expensive, to like not be earning something, you know, in order to do that startup position. And so I think that to me, there's a difference between like, I mean, something I didn't talk about, but when I was studying in Paris, a group of us, we created called ourselves DP Art, Discovery, I can't remember. Anyways, and we went and did studio visits, and then we did like kind of an art exhibition where we sold the works. We didn't make any money, it was for the artists, but it was things that we were practicing, but we're still at school, right? So it's not, so I would say take every opportunity, then also create communities, you know, there's collectives of artists that get together, so you could rent a space, everybody pays a due, you put the money together in a pot, you can do the exhibition, art sales, stuff, things like that. But yes, being paid for what you can do, but also, you know, and I'm sure you guys go through this, I mean, the numbers of letters of reference that we write, we don't get paid for that, but we do it because we want this person to advance. And I also feel that, you know, I remember when I was living in Paris, I did this whole work in this archive with this Japanese curator, and every day after work, she would take me for a coffee, and each time I tried to pay, she would say no. And she said, when you will be, I'm paying because you're young, but when you are in my position, then it'll be your time. And then a few weeks ago, I went out to dinner with a past employee who now has a big job and has children. And I said, oh no, Marianne, I don't want to pay for you. She's like, I have a job. And I said, it's fine. It's me feeling that I'm the grown up now, you know? So this notion of being mindful of the condition in which people, you know, live, you know, when I go out with a young person, I'm like, it's fine, I'll take it, you know, not because I'm rich, but because I know what it means to have a meal that's paid for, you know, or to be in a situation that somebody says, let's go out to dinner, but you can't really afford it, right? So it's like, be thoughtful and always like, and that's why there's been this whole move of unionization in all these institutions, because, you know, like people don't have help, benefits, don't have, you know, and the cost of living. And so if we want institutions to represent the diversity, the class diversity, the diversity of society, we must think of, you know, that labor. And I had a sister who was an artist, and there was a work of hers that I really liked. I was 18 and I said, can you give it to me? And she said, give, how am I going to ever make it? So I bought the work, you know, it took me a few months. And that's when I was a student. I used to put $200 a year to buy an artwork. And I would always find something, you know, and because of that comment, it made me early on understand that, you know, even though she's my sister, I need to buy her work. You know, I mean, she sold it to me cheap, but she still sold it to me, you know, I got a deal, but I also feel that I purchased it, which means that I validated, you know, her labor, her work. So I think these questions are very important, and I know that there's more and more, at least in the world I came from, donors that were sensitive to creating these fellowships, you know, so that people have time and resources to do research, and that from that fellowship, it gives them that work experience in order to, you know, to land a job after.
I tend to just think of the work of artists as work.
Mhm.
You should be paid for your work. I mean, I really do think that. You know, I know, and the idea, the thing that people say is, do it for the love. Aren't you passionate about this? Just do it for the passion. Is code for, we want free labor and we don't really care about what happens to you in the course of the free labor that you give to us, right? So it's, you know, your passion for a thing is great. But if there's some skill that comes with that passion that is actually being put in service of an institution, that's actually work, and you need to pay people for that. So I don't know what the landscape looks like in the art world.
Well, in Canada, again, sorry for referencing, there's like artist fees, you know, and artist fees.
Much more institutionalized.
Yeah,
For artist fees than we do in the US.
Artist fees, if you're doing like a solo show, depending on the budget of the institution, there's a certain level. If it's a group show, if it's a show that lasts, and it's not perfect either, and then, you know, I mean, I remember when I first started at Bishop's, they didn't even pay artist fees, so I started with $250. Everybody said yes, but at least I said, well, this is what I have. So instead of like, oh, I have nothing, I can't pay you, right?
Yeah.
Which is a completely different question. So I think, you know, then after it's up to the person to say, yes, this is good for me, or no, it's not good for me, you know. And for me, I would always, you know, we would have different levels, and then after it's a conversation, and it depends, you know, you might not have the budget to give a big artist fee, but if you're going to take an ad in a newspaper, if you're going to provide a publication, you know, like there's other things that you could say, well, this is what I'm proposing to you. And then, you know, when you publish the book, you give them 50 books,
Right.
not like 2 books or 3 books or 1. You give 50 books and you go, and then they could sell it, they could keep it, they could use it for you know, for their own representation. So, but acknowledging the work of everyone, from the custodian to the gallery attendant to the curator, assistant curator, like everybody needs to have, you know, to be remunerated, because everybody is part of, you know, you need good technicians to do the work, you know.
Absolutely. Rhonda, did you have any questions you wanted to touch on before we go out to the audience?
I just have an observation. I wrote this down as you were talking about your first job. Black girl magic is just hard work, right? That's what because I think probably a lot of people look at what, especially at the first museum, you know, look at what you did and think, oh my God, you know, because that's phenomenal. I don't know if you know that. Do you know that was phenomenal, what you did? That was amazing, right? That amount of work for those few resources is, you know, in, I think the tradition for a lot of oppressed peoples of making a way out of no way, right? That's what you did, but that's not magic, that's hard work.
Yeah.
But I think that model is, I think that's the model that people expect for, especially for institutions that are not well resourced, right? That there might not be money there, but if they can hire someone who has the knowledge and the drive to do what you did, that it could take the institution to the next level.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate what you did, but I also wanted to say, wow, right? But the other thing is that I paid attention to is that you started with a quote from Frantz Fanon, and then you ended with a quote from Frantz Fanon, and the common word in both quotes is always. And I thought about what that meant in the scope of your work. You're always working on building and doing something bigger and bringing more people in. And I really appreciate that. I do, because I think that in the art world, making sure that people have access should be an always endeavor, right? We should be always striving to do the kind of work that you're doing to not just bring people into art world, art knowledge, but to take that knowledge external to the institution. So I appreciate that too.
Thank you. It's really, I mean, I always feel like whenever the artist gives us the work, trusts us, then we become the custodian. And then I hope secretly, sometimes I think we're failing, but we keep going, that we're transforming our visitors' lives. And that maybe, and I always tell people that sometimes a work might not resonate with you right then and there. It might be, it might be 3 years after, it might be, when you're grappling with something in your personal life, that suddenly this work that was there that you saw suddenly makes sense to you. And for me, that's always been the greatest joy. And it's always come from, I always feel so lucky to be able to do what I do. And so I, and it's interesting, I always thought I would make all efforts to tour exhibitions and understand the condition in which my colleagues are also. So if I'm going to want to tour an exhibition, I'm not going to offer it for 50,000 because nobody's going to be able, there might be some people, but those general institutions can't do it because they don't have money. So for me, what was more important was to tour the exhibition so that the artist has a different public, of course, to make some money, but I'm not thinking of making 25,000. I'm thinking, 10,000, 8,000, 7,000, some little something. And it's very interesting because, I've left my previous institution and somebody said that some of the people there now are like, why are we touring a show for $8,000? We're not making any money. And I'm thinking, it was never about this. It was a bit about this because, I'm thinking, okay, well, this can help us to, aggregate some money, but it was more about the joy of the artist seeing their work shown elsewhere to a different public who will also get something out of that work, so it's just, and so you realize also that people that are in institutions, like in everything, some people want to do the minimum or don't feel like doing much more, or think that to be successful, everything needs to cost a lot of money, that you need to have a huge budget, And so I'm never afraid to say we don't have money. Of course, we have more money than other institutions, but every dollar we should think about whether we really need to spend it. Because, if I have to choose between doing projects, paying staff, there's a lot of and we don't have, endowments that are, endless. So, but there is a joy. I always feel very, I don't know, how can I say? I can't even believe I do the things I do. So I always feel like I'm this little girl going, is this my grown-up job? Have I made it, And it's always the joy of having people come and see exhibitions and react to the work of artists. And because I think it's all about life and I always say that artists without an audience, I mean, then they stay in their studios. Yeah, they need that other community to celebrate and to learn from. And I'm always in awe of the ability that artists have of, mining the archive. And then, especially now in this era that nobody seems to share the information, artists are constantly, teaching us about past events that have been buried. And suddenly through the work of an artist, you're like, oh, I never knew about this, you know? And so then it provides you a link to go and do your own research if this is a subject matter that is of interest. And if the subject matter is not of interest, at least you're informed from one perspective.
I want to make sure the audience has time to jump in and ask questions. Yeah, please.
Yes, so I have a question. I remember when you shared that you released $10 million. My question to you, how are you able to walk away from your work at that point that you began to become recognized? Like, what was the larger prize that you had your eyes on?
Oh, I think it's that you know, I had finished the catalog of collection with, well, it wasn't even finished, but it was like pretty finished. So I was ready to move to something else. And I think the types of conversations that I wanted to have, such as Unfinished Conversation, Stuart Hall, those were not conversations that could be meaningful in Joliet. Not because the people would not have been interested, but the population was not, you know, so I wanted to talk and show the types of works by different artists, which I thought the power plant was a better platform for me to do. And being in a big city like Toronto with a large Black population, et cetera, and my kids were growing up and I wanted them to be in that environment. All of that was like, you know, it was an institution that did more international work, which had more resources. And that's why I felt I was ready to leave, because we had done all the work on the collection, we had done the publication, and we had secured the $10 million. Then after it was, what was the idea around the building? I would have probably done it completely differently. And I remember my daughter's like, yeah, you left, so you have nothing more to say about it. But I'm happy that they continued on, and the museum is thriving. And the other thing, the person who's running it now, Jean-François, he's really good at stuff that I would have never liked to do. You know, he's really good because he's a guy of like being at the what is it, the business chamber of commerce, and you know, like all stuff that I would have gone, oh God. But this is what the museum needed at that point. So he's really good, you know, at the art part, but he's really good at that other part that I'm not sure as a Black woman in a homogeneous community that I would have enjoyed hanging out with the local businessmen, which were all nice to me, you know, and they were always really impressed. Like the what is it called again? The councilmen and women. I remember when I was pitching to them to give money, one of them said to a councilwoman, he's like, you know, she's a really good salesperson. You know, I don't know if I get the art, but she's good. You know? So that's why I was able to walk away, because I was offered something that I think I was ready for this next chapter, and because I had done most of what I thought was important for me to do at Musée d'Art de Joliet.
Thank you so much.
All right.
We
How do
had
you
some
say-
more questions.
Okay, well, go ahead, yes.
So, when you're selecting pieces for curating, what sort of elements in the community specifically would you tie to elements of the art?
Oh, well, you know, like what
Do
can
you
I?
mind repeating the question so that people who are recording it can hear it?
So your question was, which elements do I choose from in the community to choose the works of art that I'm going to present?
Yeah, like how do you make those connections to figure out, like, in a place that like you haven't been before?
Oh, yes. So, you know, it's really being perceptive and also being aware of, let's say, larger questions that I think an artist might present in its work that people can grapple with, you know, like urgent questions. So, for instance, let me try to find something. Yes, I showed the work of this Swiss German artist, Miriam Kahn, who shows a lot of paintings and drawing of women. She's a staunch feminist, And she also had all these series of paintings where she was showing women in hijab, but she was not afraid to show their genitalia. And so her whole question was to put us in a position of, from the Western world position, we think that these women are being taken advantage of. So again, we think we're the savior. Then from the perspective of some people in the Middle East, they're just, the women are objectified. So she wanted to show us that in both positions, we're forgetting the role of these women with their own agencies about their own question. She's her grandmother and father were welcome as refugees in the 1930s in Switzerland, and they were Jewish. And she always feels that she's alive because they were welcomed as refugees. So in a lot of her paintings, she will not talk about the Holocaust or anything. She's going to talk, she fights for the plight of refugees because she cannot believe that, you know, where she lives, where there's all the space and Europe has space, why do they refuse to bring these people in who need asylum? So for me, in this era where, you know, we talk about the Syrian refugees, it comes in and out of the news because we have other things to take care of, supposedly, while meanwhile, these boats keep coming in and people keep dying. I chose this artist because she was talking about violence, about power, about refugees, about sexuality. And I thought that her work encapsulated all of this. So there were different points of entry that I thought her work could be relevant to the now. And so I chose to this was one of the reasons that I chose this artist at that moment.
Thank you.
I think we can do one more and then we'll have to call it. So please go ahead.
I am curious about the role of AI in curating shows, and you know, the Dali at the Dali show doing the tapestry dreams as people enter, and you know, various ways that AI is now being incorporated into the presentation or representation of art. And especially at Wexner, where they have such a heavy computer science department. Do you how do you see the role of AI as a
I'm so bad at this because, like, you say AI and I know what it is, but I don't really know what it is. So I'm a Luddite completely. So I think that I think, you know, there's a difference between how do you say that? Like, I'm not really interested in that, you know. I still feel the human element, you know, doing a video, doing a drawing. I mean, if you use computer and all of this to do this, it's still, there's still a human being behind it doing it. I'm much more interested in that type of work, you know, like I don't understand NFTs. I'm still wondering why, you know, and I keep listening to podcasts, and each time I listen, I'm nowhere near understanding. Maybe I have seen projects like this. I'm not interested in this myself. But again, you know, I might have a curator who's really interested in this, and then they'll have to pitch it to me, and maybe I'll go, yeah, you try it, you know, because it's also about discovering, right? But so I couldn't, I know that I would not use AI to write, you know, wall text or anything like that, you know, because I still think there's even though it's difficult to write, to find the right words, to be copy edited, to all of that, there's still that joy of doing that work, and to try to translate the work of an artist into words. And then the shorter the text, the more you have to be really intentional about how you do it. And then when you have it done and it's well done, there's like a pride in it. But I couldn't answer that question because I'm not familiar, you know, right now about all of what AI could mean in an art world. And every example that I've seen, I was in an art fair and they had like they had this program that would take all these paintings and put them together and create another painting, and I'm going, why? Like, to me, it was like, I don't even understand why I would do this. Maybe some people might find it great because they see a piece of Cézanne together with someone else, but to me, I would rather look at the Cézanne work or these multiplicity of works instead of having something that becomes weaving of, you know, an arm of this or that. To me, it felt like it was interesting as something to see and the possibility of the program, but to me, it did not answer as an artwork in the view of a unique artwork that has, you know, that has something special to say to me, because you're taking from a whole bunch of people and creating something else, you know. It's more of that for me would be more of a game than be at the level of an artwork.